This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Don't touch that dial. Hi, everybody. This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback, on with one of my favorite guests of all time, David McKnight. And we should title this podcast, two guys who have 7 kids in financial services or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of financial implications of having 7 kids. So for sure, that would make for some good.
Yeah, it makes me even think differently about whether I buy this piece of property or do that, legacy planning, my whole, you know, I'm sure you're the same way. Like, I don't really do anything but for legacy. Like, my whole view is towards, I have what I call the 100-year plan. Like, what's going to happen the next 100 years? It changes the way you do everything. So I do want to talk about that later on. But first, let's talk about your latest book, The Guru Gap. For those who are not familiar with David McKnight, give our audience a 30-second bio.
Yeah, well, I came into the financial services industry in 1997 and, wrote a book back in 2013 called The Power of Zero and sort of self-published it, crossed my fingers, threw it out on Amazon and hoped for the best. And you know, to my extreme surprise, people started to buy the book. And here we are. 10 years later, it sold about 400,000 copies, and it spawned a number of follow-up books, including Tax-Free Income for Life and releasing next Tuesday, The Guru Gap. So it's been sort of a wild ride, but I've known you for quite a bit. I think I've been on your radio show every single time a new book has been released, and happy to be on again.
What inspired you to write The Guru Gap?
Back in 1997, when I first started in the financial services industry, if I made a financial recommendation to a client or a prospect, this is, before Al Gore invented the internet. And so people had very few options when it came to vetting out a given financial recommendation. They could talk to their father-in-law, they could talk to their neighbor, they could talk to their tax preparer, but very rarely would any of those conversations result in derailing the planning process. Well, we live in a totally different world today, Josh. 90% of the time when I make a financial recommendation, clients will take to the internet to vet out that recommendation. And who do you suppose rises to the top of the Google search? It's the people with the biggest platforms and the loudest voices and the biggest following. And those are generally the mainstream financial media personalities. We call them financial gurus. These are people we've all grown to know and love. So who do I focus on in this book? I focus on Dave Ramsey. Focus on Suze Orman, Ken Fisher, Clark Howard. Some people don't recognize that name. He was the Dave Ramsey of the world back when I graduated from college. And then Johnny come lately newcomer to the scene by the name of Ramit Sethi with the Netflix special and the best-selling book, I Will Teach You How to Be Rich. And what I found is that because financial gurus' job generally is to take important and complex financial principles and distill them down into 10-second sound bites, they give short shrift to a lot of the details that our clients need to be able to wring the most efficiency out of their retirement savings. And so what I found is that, I don't know if you guys can see this, the title or the cover of the book, The Guru Gap, you have the investor on the left side and you have the destination pin on the right side. The goal, the destination of every American should be, and it's been confirmed in survey after survey, they simply want their money to last as long as they do. That's the goal. They want to wring the most efficiency out of their retirement savings. The problem is when you implement guru-based advice that's designed to be one size fits all, paint by the number, black and white sort of advice, it doesn't allow people to, it actually decreases the likelihood in some cases that people's money will last through life expectancy. And so this sort of adversarial relationship that mainstream financial advisors like you and I, Josh, have had with gurus over the years has been frustrating because sometimes our clients will put more stock in what gurus say than what we say. And many times the guru's advice is not undergirded by math and actuarial science. And so this book is my good faith attempt to confront gurus on what they've been peddling to America over the last several decades and math based strategies that have been endorsed by PhDs over the last 4 decades and that are supported by math and actuarial science. And so it's really my attempt to sort of lay bare that tension that exists between these two monolithic groups, the financial advisors on the one hand, and then the financial gurus on the other, and try to make sense of what they're saying, why they're saying it, and why it may not be the type of advice you want to be implementing.
Yeah, I have a dear listener friend who always says, she always writes to me and says, "My guru." And I go, "I'm not your guru." I think Tony Robbins did a special. I am not your guru. We can do the Netflix. I want to be in on the Netflix David McKnight guru gap because what I want to do, if you can get a Netflix special, okay, you got to bring me in on this because I have talked to so many people, namely Christians who go to evangelical churches who uh, they go through Financial Peace University. And I'm all for Dave Ramsey and you not buying stupid stuff or getting out a credit card debt or having an emergency fund. But somewhere in the middle of the 12 baby steps, he doesn't know what the heck he's talking about when it comes to investments and insurance. But this has happened on more than one occasion. The reason why I'm so pumped about your book and why I want a Netflix special about it, uh, because I think of a guy that I know who shall remain nameless because I don't want to bring attention to his plight. Over the course of the years, this guy bought life insurance and didn't have much money. He was a pastor in a tradition where they don't pay pastors like anything. And so some churches treat their pastors nice, but not a lot of evangelical churches. The guy's lucky to make, 50 grand a year, 30 grand a year. And he goes, "Josh, the one thing I want is my wife to be okay if I pass." So we put together a plan. Guy was never going to be rich, put a couple $100 a month into a life insurance policy. And somewhere along the way, I get a cancellation notice from the policy. He moved away and he was very close to us. And at one time, and he moved away and, he grew apart for whatever reason. And his financial advisor was a guy who worked for me at one time, and I honored the previous relationship, and I guess they grew apart, but I didn't want to steal my friend's clients. And I saw the cancellation notice and I sent him an email, "Hey, we should meet. You're making a big mistake." And he goes, "No, we're good. We went through financial peace and we found, we can't be spending a couple $100 a month on this life insurance policy." Guess what? Guess where the guy is now? Doing experimental cancer treatments and will probably die penniless. And he could have given the love of his life, whom he loves dearly. They have a great marriage, exemplary marriage, and all because he went to financial peace. And I hear one of those stories about every 6 months of a young widow. It's always the woman for some reason holding the bag of the man's bad decision. So I love the book. I love what prompted you because why do people get so hung up on the guru? Like, I mean, I always tell people, hey, you need a plan. Don't just do something because I tell you something on the radio. Go to a financial advisor.
I like to preface these types of conversations with this general statement that I like Dave Ramsey. I like Suze Orman. I don't love Ken Fisher, but I like Clark Howard and I like Ramit Sethi. I like most of what they say. I think that America is better. They are exerting a net positive effect on America. I think America is better off for them being in it versus not. If you're making 50,000, Josh, and you're spending 60, I think we can all agree that Dave Ramsey is precisely the person that you should be talking to. He's very good about, at motivating, inspiring people with hope to get off of square one and on the road to financial freedom. However, I have this saying that Dave Ramsey and company are good for bad investors, but they're bad for good investors. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you're the guy that's making 50 and spending 60, then implementing the baby steps is going to move you further along towards your financial goals than not doing anything. So in that sense, I think Dave Ramsey has been helpful to a certain segment of America. However, if you have $1 million or $2 million, you're a disciplined, sophisticated investor, and you're trying to figure out how to wring the most efficiency out of that $2 million. Dave Ramsey's the last guy in the world you want to talk to. Why? Well, I like to quote Wade Pfau, who wrote the foreword for this book. He says that if you implement Dave Ramsey's advice, which is to take 8% withdrawal rates on your assets in retirement and to put 100% of your allocation in the stocks, he says you will run out of money in advance of life expectancy 63% of the time. It's not even a coin flip. It's 2 out of 3 times. You will run out of money before you run out of life. And so, Dave Ramsey, I think, can be helpful for the person that's sort of, toiling away and not really getting ahead. But in the very moment that you reach that financial goal of having $1 million, you need to completely switch who you're listening to. You need to discard Dave Ramsey's advice and avail yourself of the full financial toolbox that advisors like you and I are recommending. That's like I said, undergirded and corroborated by math and actuarial science. And so that's really my general feeling about these gurus, that they say some good things that help some parts of America. But if you implement the whole 9 yards, then it's what I call the Dave Ramsey circle of poverty. He gets you out of debt on the road to financial success, then he promptly bankrupts you by taking an 8% withdrawal rate. So
There are certain people, and I'm sure you know this, who will always be living paycheck to paycheck. They just can't get out of their own way financially. I think of my mother and father. God rest their souls. They're in heaven now. But, life didn't work out for them financially. It did in their family. They had a great faith. They had great family values. They had great wisdom they imparted to me. But when my mother had a couple extra grand, she would buy gifts for people. She would just spend too much. So I get the point, right? Take that money, save it in an index fund or save it in a mutual fund, but some people never save. I just think even the mindset is one of poverty and sets one's up, like even like the whole pork and beans and rice. We did an episode on my podcast called False Prophets. Josh Fisher, our beloved producer's cat, almost died. And Dave Ramsey would rather have the cat die because it doesn't fit into the budget. And people don't live their lives based on that. You get what? I don't know. I know you're trying to be nice because a lot of people like Dave Ramsey, but I just have such a angst over their content. I met Dave Ramsey because we're on the same radio station, WR in Manhattan. I think he's a good guy. It's just ideas have consequences, right? And the problem is, I just think of all these people, widows and widowers who I met, who are left handling the bag because of basically they followed Dave Ramsey's advice.
and so I try to compartmentalize a little bit when it comes to Dave Ramsey. I can say, okay, when Dave Ramsey says 100% of cash value life insurance sucks 100% of the time, there's no nuance in that recommendation. When he says that, you shouldn't do a Roth conversion if you're within 5 years of retirement, you shouldn't do a Roth conversion if you don't have the cash with which to pay the tax on it. You should never bump up into a higher tax bracket if you're doing a Roth conversion, even if you're in the 22. That's the poster child. I'm like, 22, that's absolutely when you should be bumping up into the next higher tax bracket, because for 2% more, you can convert an extra 180,000 per year and get more money shifted to tax free. And so he comes up with these pithy little aphorisms that don't really correspond to anything in the mathematical universe. And so it's frustrating. So I say, okay, how do I compartmentalize this? I mean, I listen to he was addressing some evangelical crowd on a YouTube video I watched, and I sat through the entire thing, and I'm like, gosh, there wasn't anything in that video that I really disagreed with. And so I think that, I've maybe mastered the ability to compartmentalize a little bit where I can say, look, I like the things that he does in this department.
I think it hits home for me because my parents were penniless for a number of years because they cashed out their disability insurance. Then my dad had a heart attack. They cashed out their now. If you talk to Dave Ramsey, he would probably have said, "Oh, you shouldn't have cashed out the disability insurance." I'm not casting aspersions on his motives. I'm just saying ideas of consequences and his minions in churches across America are not giving empowering advice. But anyway, I don't want to pick too much on him. You said something really good on the 22 and 24% bracket. So everybody go out, get the Guru Gap. I want to talk more about it. But um, talk about that. That sounded really cool, Roth conversions, because you do hear this from some of the gurus. Don't do a Roth conversion. First, talk about what you're even talking about. 'Cause some people may not even know what a Roth conversion is. We got to realize that. Hey, and then why somebody should want to do it and that 22 to 24% bracket, because I just did that with a couple in my office uh, this week. We bumped them up to the 24% bracket on Roth conversion, and we gave them a plan for in 10 years, all their money to be tax free. So they're in the 0% tax bracket. And mind you, they have like a $5 million plus net worth. They're going to be in the zero bracket when they're like 11 years from now. It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, you got to begin with this premise that we're on this sort of fiscally unsustainable trajectory as a country. We have 35, $36 trillion of debt that's expected to grow by another $2 trillion per year over the next 10 years, and then $3 trillion per year after that. Um, David Walker, former Comptroller General of the federal government, says that if we don't change course, the tax rates will have to double by 30, by tax rates will have to double by 2030 or we go broke as a country. A recent study out of Penn Wharton says that if we don't right our fiscal ship of state, that no combination of raising taxes or reducing spending will arrest the financial collapse of our country. And so we're marching into this future where that's potentially cataclysmic. And I think we're seeing the Doge and, Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk and Elon Musk seems like every other tweet he's making these days is about the national debt. And so more and more people are starting to see the handwriting on the wall as it relates to the fiscal trajectory of our nation. And so most experts are now on board with this idea that tax rates even 10 years from now are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today. And if that is in fact the case, why are 95% of Americans still contributing the lion's share of their retirement savings into tax deferred vehicles like 401ks and IRAs? In other words, they are getting a deduction at today's historically low tax rates only to postpone the payment of those taxes to a point in the future when most experts now agree tax rates are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today. And so really, why would you do a Roth conversion? A Roth conversion says, let's preemptively pay tax on that 401k or an IRA. Let's not wait until the IRS requires it of us in retirement. Let's pay that tax today, take advantage of historically low tax rates so we avoid having to pay taxes down the road when tax rates are most likely going to be much higher than they are today. And so the whole name of the game when it comes to Roth conversions is you want to pay a lower tax now than you would sometime down the road. And so we know that the Trump tax cuts expire in 2026. I personally believe that they're going to be extended because Trump campaigned on that message. And most policy experts agree that he's going to extend the Trump tax cuts because he has a simple majority in the House and Senate. And so that means we probably have about 9 more years during which to take advantage of historically low tax rates and execute these Roth conversions. And so the 24% tax bracket becomes the sweet spot in that entire process because for only 2% more than the 22, most people are in the 22% tax bracket already. So what we advocate for, and this sounds like this is the same thing that you advocate for, is you convert to the top of the 22. But remember, the 24 is only 2% more and allows you to convert an extra $183,000 and only costs you 2% on the margin. that is a no-brainer for most of the people that I meet with. And so it's absolutely a strategy that people should be considering of all times at this point in
Wow.
the history of our country.
Yeah, that 22 to 24 is the sweet spot, especially if you're in a higher bracket, like, in the 30s. You have to realize that someday you're going to pass. And I see this with kids of clients who scrimped and saved. Their kids end up pulling money out of the IRAs, and then they're in the highest tax bracket of their life, usually in the 30s. So even though you might pay more tax, slightly more by going up from the 22% bracket to the 24, you're saving future taxes when you pass. Do you want to talk about that? Because people don't give that much thought to that.
So people will say, I don't want to pay a tax because I just want to pass all this money on to the next generation. I don't want to bump it to a higher tax bracket. But consider this: it used to be that you could do what's called a stretch IRA, where your children could stretch the tax obligation on that inherited IRA over their own lifetime, right? Well, with the recent legislation, that's no longer a possibility. In fact, you now have to um, liquidate your inherited IRA within 10 years. And Josh, I'm going to tell you that there's two types of children that are going to inherit these IRAs. They're the people that will spend it within 18 months, in which case they're going to take, and let's just talk about $1 million IRA. They're going to realize that $1 million of income on top of their own income all over the course of 1 or 2 tax years, right? In which case they're going to end up paying possibly 50% to the IRS, which is what the parents' goal was to avoid the entire time, was to give half away to the IRS. And then you're going to have the other kid that says, I don't really need the money. I'm pretty good at getting by, with my own money. I'm a good saver. And so what they do is they don't liquidate any of that money and they sort of forget about it. Okay. And then the 10th year rolls around and they get some sort of a notice, or they realize, hey, the 10-year period is over. And now I've got to liquidate all of that money all in one year. In the meantime, that $1 million has become $2 million. And then they have to realize it all as income all in one year at a period in time when tax rates are much higher than they are today, at their marginal tax rate, at a period in their life when they have no deductions. And so that's a tax catastrophe that's waiting to happen. And if they inherit instead a Roth IRA, they don't really have any of those issues. They still have to liquidate the money within the 10 years, but they don't have the tax consequences that go along with it. Why not pay the tax today at 22 or 24% levels so that your kids can inherit that money tax free regardless of when they liquidate it?
So let's go back to the gurus. You wrote the book, The Guru Gap. I would love to do a little expose with you on the gurus. When you look at the underbelly of some of these people, precisely what they do or who they're connected to actually reveals some of what they're saying is a bit hypocritical. Like, for example, Ken Fisher said, I'd rather die in hell than go to an.
Die and go to hell before I sell you an annuity.
Yeah. Well, one, I always found that to be a little sacrilegious and very taking light matters of eternity. But so I was kind of offended by that. But putting on my big boy pants. Then I found, I don't know if you remember this, that he was a large investor of annuity companies. Did you ever study that?
I had heard about that. Now, the thing I've got to warn you is that of these five gurus, I'm not going to mention who. One of them's already given me a cease and desist. So if I don't care to comment on any one of these gurus, I'm not going to. But go ahead with your line of questioning. I have to figure out whether I want to comment on it or not.
I think they're fair game when they say stuff like that. I mean, it's public record. He obviously has knowledge in stocks and American equity. One of the largest sellers of fixed indexed annuities in the world. He was one of the largest investors for a number of years. I think they ended up divesting of that largely because of maybe the flack he was getting. I think Tom Hegna and other
Yeah.
people were giving him flack for it. But he was one of the largest investors in one of the biggest annuity companies on the planet for a number of years. It was American Equity Investment Life Insurance, symbol AEL. So when you looked at the public record, so I found that was a bit, hypocritical. But if you want to not talk about him, I don't want you to get a cease and desist. So
I do have a big section in my book on Ken Fisher, and one of the sections I actually go through and I dissect that video that he made, which is I'd rather go to hell than that's that's literally the phrase that he leads with. I would rather go to hell than sell you an annuity, and he gives 8 reasons why. And one of the reasons I thought was interesting was he says that anything an annuity can do, a Ken Fisher investment portfolio can do better, right? So anything annuity purports to be able to do, we can do better, right? And so I tackle that proposition in the book. And Ken Fisher's a big fan of the 4% rule, and he says that the best way to purge longevity risk from your portfolio in retirement is to simply adhere to the 4% rule. What that fails to acknowledge, however, is that if the goal and let's put some real numbers, apply some real numbers to his proposition. Let's say you got $1 million, and that means that you can take out $40,000 per year that first year, adjusted every year thereafter for inflation. So if 40,000 adjusted for inflation is what you want, then the Ken Fisher approach is a pretty expensive way of going about doing it because it costs you $1 million to realize $40,000 of income. If I were to take that same goal of getting $40,000 adjusted for inflation every year in retirement, I could take under today's prevailing interest rates, I could take $650,000, give that to an annuity company, and they would in exchange give me $40,000 per year adjusted every year for inflation. So for $650,000, I was able to purge longevity risk from my retirement picture. The Ken Fisher approach cost me $1 million. My approach freed up $350,000 with which I can do some very interesting things. I can get some long-term care. I can create a discretionary fund with which I could travel the world or fix the hole in my roof or replace my carburetor or what have you. And so the Ken Fisher approach is the, bar none, most expensive way of making sure your money lasts through life expectancy. And it isn't even 100% foolproof. It's only 85%. He acknowledges in another study that it may be as low as a 75% success rate. And so that's just an example of where I take Ken Fisher to task for some of the things that he says in that video.
but to me, these people are in the public eye. I even challenged one time Dave Ramsey to a debate, and we would have a good jovial back and forth. None of these people ever debate, by the way, because one time I got Ken Fisher's annuity book. It was filled with gross generalizations, sweeping generalizations, and false information on returns on annuities and saying you could do better in treasuries than by buying certain annuities when that was plain out false. And the idea was that the guy was Chris Hogan, Mike, but this was crazy. If you get Ken Fisher's book on annuities, it looks so nice. There's charts, there's graphs, looks so almost unbiased. But then when you look at what he compares to an annuity, he compares an annuity to buying treasuries in the 80s. Like, so he's not saying, well, what if you bought treasuries in 2019 when it was 0.01 and the yield on an annuity was 6? He's saying you had to have the foresight to buy in treasuries in the 80s. Well, duh. Buying treasuries in the 80s made Bill Gross a billionaire. I mean, it was one of the best trades of a lifetime, so it's just, that's like a gross misrepresentation. That's one issue I have with him. The other issue is he did a fund and they purged it from the internet, but you could Google this. It's called the Prisma Fund. So there was a time when he was getting so big, he was trying to do a mutual fund that if you're a Ken Fisher fan from reading his Forbes articles, you just buy Prisma. They stopped selling it. You know why? The returns weren't that good. And because it gave the public a way to see audited mutual fund numbers, because when you have a mutual fund, you got to present the numbers and they have audited returns. So if you Google Ken Fisher Prisma, you'll see it. But they kind of struck it from the record. And then the other thing, when people have criticized him in the past, and you Google articles, Ken Fisher, MSCI, he doesn't even index to the S&P. He indexes to like the MSCI World Index, which has woefully underperformed the S&P the last, 15 years. So I have a lot of issues with some of these guys, but I mean, I'll commend him for, I like individual stocks. I like that he's for stocks for the long haul. I just think like why be, I'm not denigrating his approach, his approach of buying stocks. I'm all for. It's just why do you denigrate a product that might fit person's needs? Like you're saying, annuities, you're going to get greater income. Say that point again for people who don't, because I think that gets lost that you can take a unit of a dollar and get greater income in an annuity than a regular portfolio. Make that a little plainer for people.
You got to start with the premise. And I think this is borne out in all the surveys that the number one fear for an American, pre retiree, retiree, is running out of money before they run out of life. Okay. So that's the number one fear. So the question is, and we call that longevity risk. So the question is, how do you purge longevity risk from your portfolio? What is the least expensive way of doing it? And what all of the gurus tend to universally agree is that the 4% rule, which is you can never take more than 4% of your day one retirement balance, adjusted every year thereafter for inflation. That is the best way to make sure your money lasts through your actuarial life expectancy. And that has about an 85% success rate. In other words, 15% of the time you will run out of money in advance of life expectancy, but 85% of the time you're going to make it. So the question is there a less expensive way to make your money last and to get higher levels of income than through the 4% rule? And that's where PhDs have weighed in on this. There's no argument in the PhD circles. The only ones that argue this point seem to be the gurus. But the PhDs, the Wade Fowles, the Michael Finkeys, the David Blanchetts of the world, they all seem to agree, and the Mosh Milevskis of the world, that the least expensive way to purge longevity risk from your retirement plan is by way of an annuity. And so the example I give in the book is you need $40,000 per year adjusted every year for inflation to meet your income needs in retirement. And based on the 4% rule, you're going to need to have saved $1 million by day one of retirement. So that's a pretty expensive proposition. Whereas if you utilize an annuity, you simply hand $650,000 over to an annuity company, and they will in turn give you $40,000 per year, adjusted every year for inflation. And so you just saved $350,000 by adopting the annuity approach, which has been maligned and demonized and vilified by all the gurus, which to me, I'm trying to figure out how the math adds up. If you can save $350,000 and do a number of really interesting things with that $350,000 and have a higher likelihood that your money lasts through life expectancy, why wouldn't people want to do that? And so that's really the beef that I have with Ken Fisher and some of these other gurus that sort of make these blanket statements and categorically vilify, uh, you know, cash value life insurance and annuities and other, important financial tools that PhDs have endorsed for years and years and years.
You can believe in a place for good annuities, consumer friendly cash value insurance. Doesn't mean there aren't ones I wouldn't do. And then also believe in equities for the long term. Like they don't have to be mutually exclusive. Like one of Fisher's great points, and we'll give a good kudos, is he says when you're a retiree, you got to plan for a 30-year retirement. So you need a portion in equities. I think his portion might be a little high, but he makes a good historical case for that. Next up, we have Marvin Bontrager, PhD, is in the live studio audience. So do you have a question, Marvin? Go ahead.
Hey David, how are you?
Hey, good. Nice to hear from you, Marvin. We've had a lot of interactions on Twitter, but this is the first time we've had a chance to chat in person. So glad to chat with you.
I completely agree with what Dave said earlier. Dave McKnight said about the phrase Dave Ramsey is good for people who are bad with money, but bad for people who are good with money. That idea, but let's really face the fact that there's a lot of people in the United States that need an intervention. Talking about some of these philosophical things hasn't worked because a lot of that is behavioral. So you do kind of have to go scorched earth when you're changing behavior like that. You have people that are living on the edge. They need to get their house in order. They're overwhelmed by debt. And so kind of look at it like, okay, people need to get their house in order. They get past that. They get things stabilized. They start investing. That's where you start branching off, and that's where I would, maybe potentially have some issues with some of Dave Ramsey's advice. But net overall, I think he absolutely does a lot of good for a lot of people. And if someone invests using his philosophy, likely they'll do very well. Now, is it the best way? Paying advisors, you know, in some cases, high fees to put them in commission-based expensive mutual funds. I mean, that's a whole separate thing, but it's not likely that they are going to ultimately end up in a bad place. They usually end up in a much better place. So I find myself, it's kind of the juxtaposition of I do definitely have issues with Dave Ramsey, but all in all, does a lot of good for a lot of people. And I think it's a little bit disingenuous to take isolated things and then apply it overall to say that, correlation doesn't equal causation. So, anecdotal experiences, so and so didn't end up well, that might have been other things related.
Yeah, I think it's rotten to the core. By the way, I was a member of Dave Ramsey's advisor team, right, Jim? And they sold the names of their people to 10 different advisors per district. I have a problem with him. I mean, David McKnight's a little bit more charitable to him. I think his advice is so rotten to the core. It destroyed my family. My father and mother were penniless because they adopted that whole buy term, invest the difference thing. They got rid of their disability insurance. Then my dad got disabled. He died penniless because he cashed out of his cash value life insurance because Dave Ramsey and those people told him to. I know many people at churches. By the way, the people who are benefiting from Dave Ramsey are smart people anyway. They're generally highly disciplined people who would have been good listening to anybody. And then the biggest problem I have is this whole Ramsey solutions thing. If Because I was an advisor for this, I paid to be a part of the program, and they gave you 10 different leads. The people said, I don't even like Dave Ramsey anymore because I was a fan. I gave my name to be called, and I got called by 10 different people. So I get it. I respect what you're saying. I just disagree. I have a lot of issues with Dave Ramsey. So it's kind of like a triggering person for me because I know so many people, right, Jim? Jim's been at churches. His church did Dave Ramsey. And how many people are better off for it? There are people who are better off anyway. The people who go through financial peace and do well are generally people who would do well regardless. That's my take. But I don't want to, I said he may be hazardous to your wealth, not that he was hazardous.
Well, but you just said rotten to the core, and
I think he has taken his fame. Put your name into the Dave Ramsey ecosystem. You'll get called 10 different times by 10 different people. And we were a part of the group, and we were told, oh, you'd be given 3 different advisors to see who's a good fit, because Dave says to interview 3 people. But he then would take districts and sell it to 10 different people. So, um, you know, I was a member of that for how many months, Jim? It was a while, and it was horrible. It was a way. It totally tarnished my view of Dave as a fan of him. Um, Not that I agreed with everything he said, but I kind of was like, hey, I appreciate that he's for not, for getting out of debt, not buying stupid stuff. And we interviewed that guy. He was the nicest guy, and Dave Ramsey just eviscerated him. So I have so many issues with him. Think he's nasty. I think he uses Christian churches for his growth, and he's a nasty guy. I really have issues with him, but you know, I wish him well in life. But let's talk about some other gurus. What is your opinion on financial influencers giving advice out on TikTok?
Well, I try to not paint everything with the same broad brush. I think I'm going to evaluate them based on the merits of their advice. And I try not to paint all of these gurus with the same broad brush. There's a reason why I only picked 5 gurus for my book. There were a couple people, the white coat investor came close to make it into my book, but I just didn't want to give him a platform. he and I have disagreed on so many different issues over the years. So I tend to want to approach each one of these TikTokers on the merits of their advice. Um, Generally, I'm the type of guy that says which combination of approaches will yield the greatest result over time. And generally, my feeling is the one with the highest success rate with the lowest hassle factor is stock market investing. Putting your money in an index fund or a fund that is largely composed of indexes, and adopting a set it and forget it approach. Um, Generally, I think that yields the best results over time. And so generally, I'm going to sort of harmonize with those types people that dispense those types of you know that type of advice, which isn't to say that there aren't other ways to skin the cat, but generally I think that when people start to slam the stock market approach and say, for example, like Grant Cardone, you should take all of your money out of your 401k, take the surrender, take the to pay the penalty,
Yeah.
and put all of your money into the Grant Cardone real estate fund. I think that's a lawsuit waiting to happen. And so I think that generally I know and have observed what works over time and what's time tested. And those are the types of, you know, philosophies that I tend to embrace. And to the extent that people depart from that, I think I call them out, when I think they're acting in
You know
egregiously
what's
bad ways.
interesting? Who are the 5 you talk about in the book? Fisher, Ramsey?
So Dave Ramsey, Suze Orman, Ken Fisher, Clark
What's
Howard, and Ramit
amazing is
Sethi.
those 5 were like the big gurus of 5 years ago. Maybe this is kind of aging us. We think of them. You need to do a new book because I just Googled most popular financial influencers. Humphrey Yang, Tori Dunlap, Jeremy Schneider, Tiffany Alish, Anthony O'Neill, Dasha Kennedy, Graham Stephan, Delion Barros, and Dave Ramsey did make it there. I will give him credit. It's amazing that he is both an influencer of 20 years ago or 10 years ago and today. The fact that he was able to stay relevant, because it's funny. I talked to a friend of mine who's a big Tony Robbins fan, and he's actually friends with Tony. And he said one of the hardest things Tony's coming out with the new generation is nobody knows him, like the younger people, as much as like everybody knew Tony Robbins in our generation. And
Well, most of those people that you just listed there are YouTubers. Humphrey Yang's got a massive following. Obviously, Graham Stephan's got a massive following. But I would challenge you to do this, Josh. Go into ChatGPT and ask what are the best books on tax free retirement planning and see.
you'll be number one, right? I guess that will be the verdict, right? What Marvin's saying. Are these people net positive or net negative? There'll have to be some type of sociological experiment to say, did we get greater financial literacy? I just find that when people are inundated, they make bad decisions or they don't make a decision because they hear so many pieces of advice. So the one thing I can agree on with Dave Ramsey is he talks about the importance of getting a financial advisor or financial coach. He talks about get somebody with the heart of an educator or something or heart of a teacher. I agree with that. I think that's because I think a lot of people just they don't know what to do. So moving along, let's talk about so we talked about your book, The Guru Gap. Make sure everybody goes gets it. Suze Orman, you talk about her in the book. Uh, what's she up to now? What did you mention about her in your book?
Yeah. So Suze Orman is, of all the gurus, I probably like her the most. She is the most in line with mainstream financial consensus. She's the only CFP of the bunch. She was the CFP. I don't know if she still holds her CFP credentials, but she was the CFP through Merrill Lynch at one point, and so I think that explains her embrace of the 4% rule. She, I think, has even downgraded it to the 3% rule. She believes that tax rates, even 10 years from now, are likely to skyrocket. So she's a huge fan of Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, and Roth conversions. The only real bone I have to pick with her is her sweeping condemnation of cash value life insurance. And historically, she's been really down on annuities. I think she is coming around on annuities, some types of annuities, certainly not variable annuities. So, Suze Orman is probably the one I'm most sympathetic to. But I think that anytime you have one size fits all, unnuanced critiques and condemnations and vilifications of entire, you know, segments of products like cash value life insurance and to some extent annuities, that I find that problematic because it flies in the face of a lot of the academic research that has been trickling in over the years. That really, particularly that Ernst and Young study that was done recently. I know that the White Coat Investor had some things to say about that, but the Ernst and Young study was very clear that if you use cash value life insurance as a volatility buffer in retirement, in other words, in the year following a down year in the stock market, you live out of your cash value life insurance. That gives your stock market portfolio a chance to recover before you take further distributions. And that act alone will double your sustainable withdrawal rate on your stock market portfolio, and with a 95% likelihood that your money lasts through life expectancy. So these are the types of, when you make a sweeping condemnation of a certain financial product, then you miss out on these types of applications because you had to dispense that information in a one size fits all fashion. And so you didn't have the luxury of nuance. You couldn't really explore these little niches where these products seem to work
So
really
we got
well.
Ramsey, Orman, Fisher. What are the other two?
Clark Howard and Ramit Sethi.
Clark
Clark
Howard and
Howard and
Ramit
Ramit Sethi.
Ramit Sethi, I see him occasionally on social media. I've never really watched anything of him. What did you have to say about him?
Yeah, Ramit Sethi is the anti-financial advisor financial guru. So whereas Suze Orman might say, find a good advisor, Dave Ramsey, listen to one of my Smart Vestor pros. Ken Fisher is talk to a Ken Fisher, uh, customer service representative, what have you. He is the one that is basically adopted the position. Think, just look at the title of his book. I will make you rich. It's not talk to a financial advisor and implement these principles and they will help make you rich. It's I will make you rich. So he's trying to supplant the financial advisor. But you say, read my book, watch my documentary, listen to my podcast, and you'll get everything that you need to become successful. And I think that ignores a lot of behavioral psychology associated with, emotional investing patterns of the average American, the Dow. Dow? What's the study? The group that does
Dalbar.
that
Dalbar,
quantifies
the
the benefit.
quantified.
Dalbar.
Oh, by the way, you mentioned the Ernst and
Yes.
Young study on insurance. What is that called for people who want to Google it? Ernst and Young.
If you just Google Ernst and Young study on life insurance and annuities, it'll
Okay.
rise right to the
And
top
this
of the
other study
search
is the
results.
Dalbar QAIB, Quantitative Analysis of Investor Behavior, which basically says that the average person never gets the index, basically due to their own buying and selling at the exact wrong time. Case in point, Bitcoin. Right now, everybody wants to go into Bitcoin when they should have bought it years ago, 2 years ago, when we were in the crypto winter, if they wanted to buy it. And then cyclical behaviors and things like that, people tend to do the exact opposite of what they should be doing.
Right. And that costs you 300 basis points over the course of your life. Right. So if you could have gotten, 12%, as Dave Ramsey suggests, in an index fund, and your advisor was charging you 1% because he was there to hold your feet to the fire and hold your hand through the rocky times, then you would have netted 11%. Whereas if you had done emotional investing and buying high and selling low, like most Americans do when left to their own devices, you would have only maybe netted 9%. So you'd be 2% behind where you otherwise could have been had you had an advisor along the way.
Sometimes it's way worse than 3%. It's like 7% or something. That's an interesting study. So SETI and Clark Howard. Is Clark is what's he doing now? I don't even.
Clark is not as big as he used to be, but he has a pretty. I used to love Clark too, but he really came out strongly against cash value life insurance. He says it's a steaming hot pile of garbage. The only person who would ever try to sell it to you is a money grubbing, commission hungry life insurance salesman. So that's it's heavy handed and it's not balanced and it's unnuanced and it really vilifies people who are just trying to do the right thing by their clients. And he did a really um, bad piece on fixed index annuities a while back, where he says that if you don't honor the every stipulation, if you don't live up to every stipulation in the fixed index annuity contract, then you will experience stock market loss. Right? I mean, like, where does this come from? I mean, that's it reflects just not just a shallow understanding of how the things work, but it's just 180 or 80 degrees wrong. There's no scenario in which you could lose money in the stock market in a fixed index annuity. So, I mean, there's a little bones that I had to pick with all of these advisors, but they all had to be egregiously wrong enough to make it into the book. So those five pushed me over the edge to
Yeah,
be
I hope
willing to
I don't
include them.
make it into the book. What should people be doing with their money right now from a tax and retirement perspective? As we kind of round out the interview, what are things that people should be doing right now? We kind of talked about what they shouldn't be listening to. And basically, the whole point of that is everything should be customizable to the individual and not denigrating one product at the expense of just education. But any other things that people should be doing, namely for tax retirement? We talked about the 22 to 24% bracket. We talked about Roth conversions.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what I think Donald Trump is going to do with the tax rates. He campaigned on this idea that he was going to extend the Trump tax cuts. And, the Democrats campaigned on the idea that he was going to extend the Trump tax cuts, which they didn't agree with. And so I think that that's precisely what's going to happen. I think most policy experts agree that that's going to happen. And so what that means is that through budget reconciliation, around about October of 2025, they're likely to extend those tax cuts by another 8 years, which I think is really interesting. Remember, the name of the game when doing a Roth conversion is you want to convert that money slowly enough that you don't rise into a tax bracket that gives you heartburn, but you want to do it quickly enough that you get all the heavy lifting done before tax rates go up for good. And so, what this would effectively do is it would allow you to stretch that tax obligation over another 9 years if you include 2025. That's great because it allows you to stay in that 24% tax bracket along the way. It allows you to get more money shifted over that time frame. The downside of that is it's going to add another $5 trillion of debt to the national debt, according to Maya McGinnis of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So there's a downside to all of that. But I think that's what's likely to happen. I think that if ever there were a time in the history of our country to be undertaking a Roth conversion, it's over the course of the next 9 years. And so I think that's one of the implications of Trump's election. And I think it's something that people should be thinking about as they try to protect their hard-earned retirement savings from the impact of higher taxes down the road.
And you mentioned insurance. To me, insurance, and even Marvin was talking about this, insurance versus annuities versus stocks. Like, I don't think I've never been of the position that they're opposed to one another. Like, a good financial plan would have annuities to counter longevity risk, insurance to protect one's family, have money as a volatility buffer, equities to beat inflation, maybe a little Bitcoin, if people want to have cryptocurrency now, like maybe you have a little gold, you have cash for emergencies. Like, to me, that just always made sense to me, like a balanced approach. Why is that so ridiculous?
It's not ridiculous. They're like little puzzle pieces that fit together perfectly if you can get them to sort of match up in just the right way. I mean, all of those things work in concert one with another, and they can be very synergistic. For example, if you use an annuity to bridge your income gap in retirement and to guarantee your income for the rest of your life, now you don't have to worry as much about the ebbs and flows in your stock market portfolio. So it gives you a permission slip, as it were, to take more risk in your stock market portfolio, which, according to Dave Ramsey, and I actually agree with them, if you are 100% allocated to stocks in your portfolio, you will have better returns over time. That's just a proven fact. And so when you utilize these types of investment tools, they allow you to take higher levels of risk, which over the arc of a 35 year retirement can add up to quite a bit of extra wealth. And so these things have to be used in concert with one another. You can't do it in a willy-nilly sort of a way. You have to have someone shepherding you through the process, and someone who's been down that road before to make sure that you are utilizing them in just the right fashion.
Yeah, it's a beautiful puzzle. But again, it's like, why is that so novel? It makes no sense to me. I guess because we want a soundbite world where we
Yes,
can.
that's exactly the problem. You can't really plumb the depths of all of the different applications of these products in a 10-second soundbite. And so that doesn't work in service of Ramsey and company's broader goal, which is to appeal to a broad swath of America so that you can expand your empire. And Ramsey, by definition, must appeal to every possible demographic. And so when he gives a pithy 10-second aphorism that completely characterizes cash value life insurance or annuities, he does so at the expense of nuance. And so that's really what gets lost in all of this when we deal with financial gurus is we miss out on the nuance. And that's really what my book, The Guru Gap, is driving at.
No, great. So, folks, where can our listeners find the Guru Gap?
Right off of Amazon. That's the best place to get it.
Go to Amazon, search for the Guru Gap, David McKnight. And folks, if you want the book, go to Amazon. If you want to schedule with our team at 888-988-JOSH for a free review, I'll buy one of David's books for you. Just give us a call at 888-988-JOSH. To me, it just makes sense, right? I don't, maybe I had good teachers in the business. Like the buy term invest the difference philosophy only works if you have 20 or 30 years. So to me, it always made sense. When you're poor and you have no money, you buy term insurance. Then you save, 10 to 15% of your pay. Then as you're saving that 15%, you put some towards equities, some towards permanent insurance, some towards, you know, real estate. And as you grow your wealth, you're growing because if you really do a good job and you amass a fortune, I'm sure these people have life insurance. And I think Dave Ramsey, you talk about in the book, I don't know if you mentioned this. There was a clip I heard one time where it said he had life insurance because his wife wanted him to have it. Did you remember that? I don't
Yeah,
know.
he's denied it repeatedly.
But I heard it one time on a show.
Yeah, you hear these stories where people say, I know the guy that sold him the whole
Yeah.
life insurance policy. And so you hear all these stories, but then he contradicts it. So I don't know what to believe anymore.
Well, whatever, I thought I heard him on a show. There was a clip, and he said his wife, Sharon, or whatever her name is, wanted him to keep it. So he kept it. Yeah, that was his line. But maybe, but and the truth is, well, what about people? My wealthiest clients, I mean, 100 million, 500 million, $50 million clients, they all have large life insurance policies to pay their estate tax. So the richer you are, the more you need the life insurance.
And there are people that don't need cash value life insurance, but at the end of the day, I think that you need to be able to draw those types of distinctions if you have a pretty big platform. But that's what these gurus fail to do time and time again.
I always say you don't need it, but you may want it. We're on WOR 710 AM, which is a 50,000 watt flame throwing station in New York. And Buckley Broadcasting was one of the last privately owned. Have you ever heard of Buckley? They were one of the last privately owned broadcasting networks in the world and in the country. They weren't owned by iHeart or Cumulus or CBS and I believe Buckley passed away 2010, something like that. And they had to sell quickly due to the estate tax issue. They sold the station to iHeart, Clear Channel, which became iHeart. And you wonder, like, yeah, they didn't need insurance, but you may want it so your heirs don't have to sell your assets prematurely. I have another friend whose father was one of the founding franchises of McDonald's, and they had to sell because the father didn't believe in insurance. And you bet you're sure as mud, the second generation, they bought a lot of life insurance to pay their estate tax when they die. So um, when you talk to estate planning people and people really know, they all believe in life insurance when they're above a certain net worth. So it's interesting. Is there a time where people shouldn't have it? Sure. If somebody's living paycheck to paycheck, have term insurance that's convertible. But great always to have you, David. Um, and then we'll have to have you on again on the seven kids. Yeah, I heard saw you at the Packers game last night.
Yeah, that was a nail biter, but I felt, as we walked away, neither I nor my two boys felt really bad about the loss because we went into the Lions' den and almost came out with a victory, which means we can, the Packers can play with the best of them at this point.
Yeah. Well, another strange coincidence. My favorite team's the Lions.
No kidding, I did not know
So
that.
I've liked them since the 80s,
Boy, that's a rough road to hoe there.
and I've been very long suffering. So we're finally being blessed. And I have my Barry Sanders jersey from the 80s and early 90s. And um, I picked them. I'm not from Detroit or Michigan. I'm from New Jersey, but I always liked the way Barry Sanders played. And he was a gentleman and he wasn't, cocky or arrogant, but he was the best ever. And he signed an autograph for me one time and was always a fan of him. So I'm glad you had fun with your kids. And we'll love to have you back on again in the future. Everybody, go get the book, The Guru Gap. Be sure to follow me at Your Financial QB. Also, follow David McKnight on X at McKnight and Co. Anything we didn't share that you wanted to share with our listeners? Parting thoughts.
I don't think so. I think we hit just about all the high points there. So again, I appreciate you having me on. It was a great, fun conversation.
Thank you so much.